Chapter 1. The Mission Begins. Zeyla'ka stood before the grand window of the Vrynthi command center, her sharp eyes scanning the stars as they blinked in the distance like an endless sea of glittering jewels. The black void of space had always been her canvas, her home, a place where her species had thrived for eons. The Vrynthi were not a race of conquerors. Their power lay in patience, wisdom, and a quiet understanding of the cosmos. She wasn't nervous. She never was. The Vrynthi were the oldest and most advanced species in the galaxy, and Zeyla'ka had commanded fleets, negotiated peace treaties, and steered her people through millennia of galactic politics. She had never failed, not once, but this mission, this meeting with humans, made her pulse quicken in a way she couldn't ignore. She would be the one to represent her people. The weight of that responsibility settled heavily on her shoulders, like a cloak she could never quite shake off. Humanity was expanding rapidly, colonizing planets with the force of a storm, leaving a trail of unsettled peace and uneasy treaties in their wake. To Zeyla'ka, humans were a chaotic force, a species still shackled to their primitive instincts, aggressive, violent, unpredictable. They could never be trusted to manage the delicate balance of the galaxy. A sharp hiss broke the silence of the room. Zeyla'ka turned as the airlock doors opened, admitting a team of her officers, their presence a silent affirmation of her authority. "Captain, everything is ready for the negotiation," one of her officers said, his voice calm and reverent. Zeyla'ka nodded, a flicker of a smile crossing her face, though it was more a polite gesture than a true display of emotion. She straightened her posture and turned her attention back to the task at hand. "Good," she said. "Keep the lines open and monitor for any irregularities. This will not be a simple mission." The first shuttle had barely docked at the Vrynthi space station before she saw him. Ryan Morden, human, lead negotiator for the Terran Coalition. His name had been circulating in the diplomatic community for months, a man known for his aggression and tenacity, traits Zeyla'ka found repellent. As he stepped into the room, his gaze sharp and unyielding, she felt a wave of distaste settle in her chest. He was everything the Vrynthi feared, a reflection of humanity's violent, self-serving nature. Ryan Morden exuded confidence, perhaps too much of it. His brown hair was tousled, and his eyes gleamed with that unmistakable, cocky energy Zeyla'ka had come to associate with human arrogance. He was tall, with broad shoulders that seemed to demand attention, and his posture was too relaxed for someone about to embark on a galactic peace negotiation. "Captain Zeyla'ka Wren," he greeted her with a sharp nod. His voice was rich, tinged with a tone of casual dominance. "I've heard a lot about you." "I'm sure you have," Zeyla'ka replied, her voice controlled but cold, her arms crossed firmly. "And I have heard more than enough about your people." There was a slight tightening of Ryan's jaw at the remark, but he smiled, an easy, confident thing that did nothing to lessen the weight of her distrust. "I assure you, Captain, the Terran Coalition isn't what you've been led to believe." "Isn't it?" Zeyla'ka countered, her voice a controlled whisper that still managed to cut through the thick atmosphere of the room. "Humans are still bound to their violent nature. Your species spreads across the stars like a plague, consuming resources and forging alliances with races that cannot stand in peace." Ryan's smile faltered for a moment before he straightened, his eyes narrowing slightly. "We're not a plague, Captain. We're a species that's learned to survive and thrive. If we don't adapt, we perish. And you would be wise to understand that humanity's strength is what will keep this galaxy from descending into chaos." Zeyla'ka's skin tightened at his words, the arrogance, the unshakable belief that strength could bring peace. This was the fatal flaw of humanity, the belief that power, raw, untamed power, could smooth over the complexities of galactic politics. Zeyla'ka had witnessed her people's struggles to maintain peace long before the humans had even dreamed of interstellar travel. The Vrynthi had seen war, had felt its destruction ripple across their homeworld. They had learned the hard way that peace could not be achieved through power alone. "The galaxy has survived without your brand of strength for millennia," she said, her tone even, though her pulse quickened at the rawness of the encounter. "What makes you think your methods will bring peace?" Ryan leaned in slightly, his voice lowering as if to make his point personal. Because, Captain, sometimes you need the strength to protect peace. Zeyla'ka's eyes narrowed, the words a knife in her mind. She fought to remain composed, but the human's arrogance gnawed at her. This was the essence of the problem. Humanity was still a young species, prone to hubris and convinced that their brute force was the key to everything. She had known this negotiation would be difficult, but she hadn't expected it to feel like standing at the edge of a precipice, one where the wind howled with uncertainty. She had to be careful. Every word, every action would weigh heavily on the future of this fragile peace. The rest of the meeting unfolded with a series of tense discussions. Ryan argued his points, and Zeyla'ka countered with precision. Yet, despite her best efforts to maintain control, she found herself listening more closely to his words than she had intended. Something about him, his conviction, his belief in humanity's potential, stirred something deep inside her. She had spent her life cultivating a belief that humanity was unworthy of trust. But the more she heard him speak, the more she wondered, was she wrong? The meeting ended without any breakthrough, both sides too entrenched in their views to find common ground. The diplomatic talks were no closer to resolution, but Zeyla'ka felt unsettled. She watched as Ryan left, his confident stride unwavering, his voice echoing through the chamber. There was no mistaking it. He had a purpose, a passion that Zeyla'ka could not easily dismiss. As she turned back to the stars beyond the window, a fleeting thought crossed her mind. Maybe he wasn't what I thought. Maybe humanity isn't just chaos after all. But she quickly shut the thought down. She couldn't afford to lose focus. She was here to represent the Vrynthi, to safeguard peace in a galaxy that had yet to see the wisdom of her people. And if humanity was the storm, then Zeyla'ka would be the calm. For now. Chapter 2. Tensions unfold. Zeyla'ka stood in the heart of the Thal, the Vrynthi flagship, her mind focused on the task ahead. The ship's interior was sleek and luminous, bathed in the soft glow of bioluminescent patterns that seemed to pulse gently with the heartbeat of the vessel itself. The walls of the command chamber were organic, their smooth, undulating surfaces reminding Zeyla'ka that the ship wasn't just a vessel, it was alive. The hum of the core reverberated through the room, calming her senses, and yet her thoughts were far from tranquil. The Terra Morn, the human vessel, appeared on the holographic map, a stark contrast to the living grace of the Vrynthi ships. The humans had designed their ships for function over form, and the Terra Morn's hard metallic exterior exuded the very essence of humanity's utilitarian, no-nonsense approach to space exploration. The sight of it sent a ripple of tension through Zeyla'ka's chest. Humanity had always been a chaotic force with their unpredictable, aggressive tendencies, and now they were at the heart of the galaxy's delicate peace. Her mission was clear: negotiate a treaty that would ensure humanity's place among the peaceful races of the League of Planets. Yet, beneath that surface of professionalism, Zeyla'ka was battling the instinctive distrust she had for humans. She had seen their capacity for violence in every diplomatic discussion and in every encounter with their kind. She had no love for them, and she feared the galaxy would pay the price for their expansionist nature. But it was her duty. The Thal's command chamber doors opened with a soft hiss. Zeyla'ka straightened, preparing herself for the arrival of Ryan Morden, the human lead negotiator. As the human delegation entered, her initial impression was exactly what she had expected. Ryan was exactly as described. He exuded confidence with a swagger that suggested he was used to being in control. His broad shoulders and sharp eyes scanned the room with an easy arrogance, and the slight smirk playing at the corners of his lips made her want to recoil. "Captain Zeyla'ka," Ryan said, stepping forward with a firm handshake, his voice rich and unmistakably self-assured. "It's an honor to finally meet you." Zeyla'ka's grip was firm, but her eyes betrayed nothing of the tension coiling within her. "The honor is mine," she replied coldly, her voice betraying none of the judgment she felt. She gestured to the table where the treaty's terms were already projected in luminous blue light. "Shall we begin?" Ryan's eyes flickered over the holograms, his fingers tapping on the table as he spoke. "Of course. I'm here for peace, Captain." a peace that is long overdue. He glanced at the projections again. But peace doesn't come without strength. Zeyla'ka's brow furrowed at his words. She had heard this argument before from every human negotiator, every time they tried to broker peace. To them, power was the foundation of peace. To her, it was the antithesis. Peace wasn't built on strength. It was built on understanding, mutual respect, and shared responsibility. Zeyla'ka's people had struggled for eons to maintain that balance. The notion that strength could secure peace felt like an insult to everything she had been taught. "I'm not sure I understand," Zeyla'ka replied, her voice measured. "You speak of peace, but peace cannot be enforced through force. It is the absence of aggression that brings peace, not the threat of power." Ryan's eyes darkened as he leaned forward slightly, his voice taking on a sharper edge. "Without strength, there's only chaos. There are threats out there, Captain, things that can tear the galaxy apart. The League of Planets has done its best to maintain order, but we're on the edge of something much bigger. Humanity has the strength to keep that balance. You have to trust that we can protect peace in a way that doesn't just rely on words." Zeyla'ka's chest tightened, her mind spinning with the implications of his words. She wanted to argue, to dismiss him, but there was an undeniable truth in what he said. The galaxy was fragile, and threats were rising from unexpected corners. But still, humanity's constant desire for power, their belief that strength was the ultimate tool, was something she could not reconcile. She took a deep breath. "Your belief in power as the foundation of peace is troubling, Captain. It leads only to control, not harmony." Ryan's expression hardened, and Zeyla'ka could feel the shift in the atmosphere. She was used to human defiance, but something about his gaze now made her uneasy. "You're not seeing the full picture, Captain," he said, his voice low and steady. "If we don't step up, if we don't take charge, everything falls apart. The universe doesn't have the luxury of waiting for balance. We have to make sure that strength guides us to peace. The League of Planets has been too passive. You've tried to avoid conflict, but that doesn't work anymore." Zeyla'ka's mind raced. Ryan's words echoed in her head, his confidence almost convincing. But she fought to hold on to her beliefs, despite the stirring uncertainty in her chest. Humanity's aggressive tactics were not the answer. Strength would never lead to lasting peace. The hours dragged on as they debated, the tension growing with each passing minute. Zeyla'ka countered Ryan's arguments at every turn, pointing out the flaws in his philosophy and emphasizing the necessity of diplomacy and mutual respect. But every time she thought they were making progress, Ryan would push back, reminding her of the dangers that lurked just beyond the edge of their known universe. In the end, neither side was willing to budge. The treaty's terms remained unchanged, the meeting ending without any significant agreement. Zeyla'ka watched Ryan leave, his confidence still intact despite the tension. As the doors to the chamber closed behind him, she stood motionless for a moment, reflecting on the day's events. Despite her resolve to reject humanity's ideology, she couldn't help but be unsettled. Ryan Morden had forced her to confront a truth she had tried to ignore. Peace wasn't as simple as she had always believed. Her resolve remained intact. Humanity was a species of chaos, a threat to the fragile balance of the galaxy. But as she watched the stars outside the window of the Arsai Thal, a flicker of doubt passed through her mind. Could peace truly come only through strength? The question lingered as she prepared for the next stage of negotiations. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, and Zeyla'ka knew she would have to fight harder than ever to protect the galaxy from humanity's dangerous ambition. Chapter 3. Unexpected Attack. The stars outside the viewing deck of the Arsai Thal shimmered in a beautiful, serene pattern, their gentle pulses of light casting an ethereal glow over the command room. The Vrynthi ship, an elegant fusion of organic technology, hummed quietly in the background. Zeyla'ka stood before the holographic map, her sharp gaze scanning the quadrant. The diplomatic talks with the humans had barely begun, and yet the stakes had already escalated. Zeyla'ka's mind remained preoccupied with the growing tensions. Despite the polite facade of negotiation, she still could not shake the feeling that humanity's ambitions were more dangerous than anyone realized. She had been prepared to return to the talks with Ryan Morden, but something unsettled her. The sense that at any moment things could go wrong. A sudden alarm cut through the room, its shrill tone vibrating through her bones. The map flickered, and a red warning flashed across the holographic screen, signaling an unknown energy signature near the neutral planet Solara 6, a hub for trade and commerce. "What is it?" Zeyla'ka demanded, her voice crisp as she turned to her officers. One of the crew members was already working quickly at his station. "We're detecting multiple incoming vessels. They're not responding to any comm signals. It looks like an unprovoked attack." Zeyla'ka's heart skipped a beat. The League of Planets had worked hard to maintain a neutral zone in this sector, and any aggression here could send the entire region into chaos. But it was worse than that. Solara 6 was a peaceful planet, not involved in any major galactic conflicts. Whoever was attacking had no reason other than destruction. "Activate defensive systems," Zeyla'ka ordered sharply. "Contact the Terran fleet immediately. We need assistance." The Terra Morn was nearby. Human ships had been patrolling the region for the past few weeks as part of their alliance with the League. Zeyla'ka's fingers hovered over the controls, her thoughts racing. She had never wanted to rely on humanity, but now it was unavoidable. Ryan Morden's voice crackled through the comm system moments later. "Captain Zeyla'ka, we've received the same alerts. We'll be there in 5 minutes." Zeyla'ka felt a flicker of tension. She didn't want to admit it, but Ryan's presence might be the difference between a clean defense and disaster. The Vrynthis' defensive strategy had always been built on precision and defensive stances, not the chaotic nature of human military tactics. But for now, they were in this together. The next few minutes felt like an eternity. Zeyla'ka's fingers flew across the command console, relaying orders to her fleet. The attack had already begun. The enemy ships were launching strikes on the planet's surface, using devastating weapons to breach Solara 6's defenses. "Captain, the Terra Morn is in position," one of her officers announced. "We're ready to engage." Zeyla'ka nodded sharply. "Let's make this quick. Move into defensive formation." The command was given, and the Arsithal followed the Terra Morn into a flanking position, surrounding the hostile ships. As the enemy ships began firing on the neutral planet, Zeyla'ka saw the vast explosions erupt from the surface below, plumes of smoke rising against the backdrop of the galaxy's quiet beauty. The battle began in earnest. Ryan's voice came over the comms again. "Zeyla'ka, I need your fleet to focus on those interceptors. We'll take out the mothership. I have a plan." Her eyes narrowed as she observed his positioning on the map. There was no time to debate. She didn't trust human tactics, but this was no longer about ideology. It was about survival. "Understood. Adjusting course now." The Vrynthi fleet's coordinated movements were precise, the ships flowing gracefully as if part of a larger, more complex organism. But Ryan's human tactics were different, chaotic, instinctive, bold. He maneuvered the Terra Morn toward the heart of the enemy fleet, dodging enemy fire with precision and taking calculated risks. Zeyla'ka watched as the human ship made an unexpected move, drawing fire away from the Vrynthi ships, allowing them to strike a direct hit on the enemy's interceptors. Despite herself, Zeyla'ka was impressed. Ryan's strategy was reckless but effective. His ship was dodging at the last possible moment, and his crew seemed to follow his lead without question. There was no hesitation. She quickly adjusted the Vrynthi fleet's strategy, moving to exploit the opening Ryan had created. The two forces, human and Vrynthi, had somehow found a rhythm, an unspoken understanding. Zeyla'ka's ships moved in tandem with Ryan's, their advanced technology working in harmony with humanity's more brute force approach. Her heart pounded as she watched the hostile fleet begin to crumble under the combined assault. Ryan's voice was almost triumphant. "One down, Captain." "Motherships next." Zeyla'ka nodded sharply. "Maintain your course, Terran fleet. We'll finish this." The final blow came soon after. The Arsithal delivered the final shot, a precisely calculated strike on the mothership's core. The explosion that followed was immense, its shockwave rippling through space, sending debris in all directions. Silence fell. The battle was over. The enemy fleet was scattered, their ships disabled or destroyed. Solara 6 had been saved from complete destruction, though the planet had sustained heavy damage. But for now, the threat had been neutralized. Zeyla'ka took a deep breath, allowing herself a moment to reflect on what had just occurred. She had fought alongside Ryan Morden, and in that brief time, she had seen a side of humanity she hadn't expected: bravery, leadership, and a willingness to take risks in the face of overwhelming odds. Yet despite her respect for his skills, Zeyla'ka couldn't shake the wariness that lingered in the back of her mind. This wasn't just a battle to protect peace. It was a battle to control power, and humanity's tendency to seize power through strength was a danger that still remained. "Good work, Captain Morden," she said, her voice even, though her thoughts were far from it. "Likewise, Captain Zeyla'ka," Ryan replied, his tone easy but with a hint of exhaustion. "I think we made a good team." She looked out at the stars, knowing this cooperation was temporary. For now, humanity had proven their worth in battle. But the bigger question remained: could humanity be trusted in the long run? The battle had ended, but Zeyla'ka's mind remained unsettled. Ryan Morden had proven himself a capable leader, and their unexpected cooperation had worked, something Zeyla'ka had never anticipated. But as the Vrynthi and Terran fleets drifted away from the ruined battlefield, the question remained: was this a turning point, or was it merely another step in humanity's relentless drive for power? She couldn't yet answer that. But for now, she would have to trust the uneasy alliance, even if it was only for a short time. The battle was over, but the war, both on the battlefield and within her heart, had just begun. Chapter 4. Growing Doubts. Zeyla'ka stood alone in the observation deck of the Arsai Thal, gazing out at the vastness of space. The stars twinkled in their eternal dance, a reminder of the beauty and harmony that her people had spent centuries trying to preserve. The universe, in all its complexity, was an intricate tapestry of life. Each species, each planet, each star, all working in balance. Or at least, that's what the Vrynthi had always believed. But now, something felt different. Her thoughts were scattered, like stars that drifted apart from one another, unable to find their place. The battle over Solara 6 had been unexpected, a harsh reminder of the volatility that existed in the galaxy. Yet, in the heat of that conflict, Zeyla'ka had found something she hadn't anticipated: an unspoken cooperation with Ryan Morden, the human captain. The way he had led his fleet with such determination, the courage he showed on the battlefield, was something she hadn't expected from someone she'd always viewed as impulsive and reckless. He had proven himself in battle, yes. But what did that mean? She was used to her people's measured approach to war, swift, calculated, precise. Ryan's approach had been entirely different: bold, aggressive, and at times dangerously close to the edge of recklessness. Yet it had worked. The enemy had been defeated, and Solara 6 was spared further destruction. Zeyla'ka leaned forward, her hands pressed against the cool, transparent surface of the observation window. She thought back to their first meeting, how certain she had been that humans were nothing more than a plague, a species unable to control their violent instincts. And yet, in the moments of collaboration during the battle, she had felt something else. She had felt the human side of Ryan, a side that was capable of loyalty, leadership, and perhaps peace. But could that really be possible? Was she wrong about humanity? She exhaled slowly, her breath fogging up the glass. She had been so sure that humanity's aggression was inherent, that their nature would always lead them to conflict. She had placed them into a neat box, a dangerous, war-hungry species, and now those walls were starting to crumble. There were moments during their joint mission where she had seen a different side to Ryan, a side that valued peace, a side that saw diplomacy as more than a tool for control. But was that just a momentary thing, born out of necessity, or was it a glimpse into the future? Zeyla'ka turned from the window, her gaze falling to the data pad resting on the table in front of her. The mission logs were filled with observations about the battle, but also about the humans they had interacted with. She began to sift through the reports, her fingers brushing over each one until she found what she was looking for: information on the human factions that advocated for peace. What she read shocked her. There were indeed factions within humanity that sought to prevent the spread of militarization. that advocated for diplomacy and the preservation of life rather than conquest. The more she read, the more she realized that Ryan Morden wasn't an anomaly. He was part of a growing movement within humanity, one that believed in the potential for peace, one that rejected the violence so deeply ingrained in their history. Zeyla'ka felt a stir of hope that she quickly squashed. She was a Vrynthi captain. Her job was to maintain order, to uphold the principles of her species. But here she was, questioning the very foundation of what she had been taught. Could humanity change? Could they evolve beyond their instinct for conflict? The hum of the ship's systems was a constant in the background, grounding her in the reality of her mission. She had a duty to protect the galaxy from the destructive forces she believed humanity represented. She couldn't let these doubts cloud her judgment. But as the days passed and as she spent more time observing Ryan, listening to his arguments and seeing his passion for peace, she couldn't ignore the pull of uncertainty. The next day, Zeyla'ka stood in the briefing room, preparing for the next phase of the mission. Ryan Morden was supposed to meet with her to discuss the terms of the peace treaty with Solaris 6, but today there was a noticeable distance between them. Their previous cooperation had been essential to the success of the battle, but Zeyla'ka couldn't shake the tension that had settled between them since then. Ryan entered the room, his expression unreadable. He had always worn his emotions like armor, but today there was something different about him, something less certain, more vulnerable. "Captain," Ryan said, nodding as he approached, "we need to figure out how to stabilize the region. The enemy may have been defeated, but the aftershocks of this battle will resonate for a long time." Zeyla'ka watched him carefully, searching for any sign of manipulation, any trace of the aggression she had come to expect from humans. But instead she saw only resolve, a genuine desire to do what was right. He wasn't the same as the soldiers she had encountered in her younger years, bloodthirsty, eager for war. No, Ryan seemed different. He seemed human, real. "I agree," she said quietly, "but we must ensure that the planet does not fall into chaos. The balance must be maintained." Ryan paused, his gaze meeting hers. "We've been fighting for so long, Captain, it's hard to remember what peace even looks like. But I think we can get there, together." Zeyla'ka's heart skipped a beat, a pang of emotion she quickly stifled. She couldn't afford to let personal feelings cloud her judgment. This was about the galaxy, about the future of her people, not about some fleeting connection. Still, something lingered in the air between them, the beginnings of understanding, maybe even respect. Or was it something more? Zeyla'ka couldn't be sure. The wariness in her chest hadn't faded. The human's violence, this hidden potential for destruction, still loomed large. But as she looked at Ryan, something deep within her began to shift. The truth was, Zeyla'ka wasn't just questioning humanity. She was questioning herself. Could she truly stand in opposition to Ryan's vision of peace, knowing the truth of what she had seen in him, the pull of his beliefs, of his bravery, of his hope for a better future, was a weight she hadn't anticipated. But no matter how much she questioned, she knew she had a duty to fulfill. She couldn't let hope cloud the reality of their situation. As Zeyla'ka walked away from the meeting, a cold knot formed in her stomach. The galaxy was a vast, complicated place, and her mission was to protect it, no matter the cost. But the cost of that duty had never felt so personal. Could she truly stop the rise of humanity, knowing they had the potential for peace? Her mind raced with the possibilities. The weight of her decision would define not just her future, but the future of the galaxy. And for the first time, Zeyla'ka wasn't sure which path she should take. Chapter 5. The Crystal's Secret. Zeyla'ka stood alone in the dimly lit vault, the silence pressing in around her as the glowing blue lights flickered gently, casting shadows on the walls. The vault's organic walls were like living tissue, grown over millennia to protect what lay within. Her fingers brushed over the smooth surface of the Seraphis Crystal, hidden deep inside its chamber. It pulsed with a quiet, almost imperceptible hum, its energy palpable even from a distance. The Seraphis Crystal had been with the Vrynthi since the dawn of their civilization, an artifact of unimaginable power, capable of influencing the very fabric of time and space. Zeyla'ka had always seen it as a symbol of her people's wisdom, something that should never fall into the wrong hands. She had sworn to protect it with her life, knowing that its true potential could be catastrophic if misused. She had kept the crystal hidden in a remote section of the Thal, far from prying eyes. It was supposed to be a safeguard for her people, a weapon to ensure their dominance over the galaxy, only for those who could truly understand its intricacies. But recently, Zeyla'ka had noticed a shift, something that had been tugging at her ever since the humans arrived. Humanity's interest in the crystal was growing. The reports had come in from the Terran delegation. At first, Zeyla'ka had dismissed them as mere curiosity, but as she delved deeper into the intercepted transmissions, her worst fears began to materialize. Humanity wasn't just interested in the crystal, it was seeking it. And it wasn't for peace, it was for control. Zeyla'ka sat in her quarters, the datapad trembling in her hands. The encrypted human communications she had uncovered painted a damning picture. The human factions, led by Ryan's allies, had been secretly searching for the Seraphis Crystal, believing it to be the key to securing their future. The humans were not interested in peace. They were looking for power. They sought the crystal as a means to tip the scales in their favor, to bend the galaxy's balance to their will. Zeyla'ka clenched her fists. Her suspicions had been right all along. Humanity, despite their claims of wanting peace, was driven by ambition, a hunger for power. The idea that they could use the Seraphis Crystal to dominate the galaxy, to control time itself, was too dangerous to contemplate. They had no understanding of the artifact's true capabilities, no comprehension of the havoc it could wreak in the wrong hands. She closed her eyes, the weight of the realization sinking deep into her bones. All her years of training, all her beliefs in peaceful negotiation and cosmic justice, had led her to this moment, the one where she had to face the truth. Humanity's ambition could not be trusted. Ryan Morden might be a man of honor, but his people were not. They would stop at nothing to gain control of the crystal. Zeyla'ka's mind raced as she reviewed the data. The Terran fleet was closer to discovering the crystal's location, and every day their search for it grew more insistent. She could feel the weight of their eyes on her, the pressure building. The diplomatic mission that she had set out to complete with such purpose had now become a desperate mission to protect the crystal from falling into humanity's hands. She had to act quickly. The crystal could not fall into their grasp. If it did, the balance of power in the galaxy would shift permanently. The galaxy would no longer be at peace. Humanity's true nature would be unleashed, and with it, the potential for destruction on a scale unimaginable. Zeyla'ka began to prepare, her movements precise and deliberate. She accessed the encrypted vaults of the Thal, issuing commands to lock down the crystal and restrict access to it. She initiated a fail-safe protocol, one that would make it nearly impossible for anyone, human or otherwise, to find the crystal without her direct involvement. The Thal would become a fortress, a sanctuary for the crystal that no one could breach. As the ship's systems hummed to life, sealing the crystal away, Zeyla'ka's thoughts turned to Ryan. She had worked alongside him, seen his passion for peace, and yet the truth could not be ignored. Humanity had played its hand. There was no turning back. They wanted the crystal, and they would stop at nothing to get it. Zeyla'ka's heart sank. The humans, at least those who sought the crystal, were not the allies she had hoped they would be. She had thought that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for peace, but now she saw the flaw in her thinking. Peace could not be built on a foundation of power, and humanity was building that foundation with all the wrong intentions. Zeyla'ka stood before the sealed vault, her expression hardening. She was no longer simply a diplomat. She was the protector of the Seraphis Crystal, and her mission had just become much more dangerous. Her mind flashed to the meeting with Ryan, his confidence, his belief in humanity's potential. Was he truly blind to what was happening, or was he complicit in the pursuit of power? Either way, Zeyla'ka knew one thing for certain. The next steps she took would have consequences. There was no room for hesitation. The Thal hummed softly as she walked away from the vault, the weight of her responsibility settling deeper in her chest. Zeyla'ka's path was now clear, but it was fraught with peril. Humanity's search for the crystal would not stop, and she could not let them find it. If they did, there would be no peace, only war, chaos, and the unraveling of everything she had worked to protect. The stakes had been raised. Zeyla'ka had prepared for many things in her life, but this, the discovery of humanity's true ambitions, was something she had never anticipated. She could feel the looming shadow of the impending confrontation. The galaxy's balance was at risk, and she alone stood between it and total collapse. Chapter 6. A New Revelation. The hum of the Arsai Thal was a constant presence, filling the air with a quiet rhythm. Zeyla'ka sat at the table in her private quarters, the holographic display in front of her flickering with data from the latest communications. The diplomatic mission had taken another turn, and the pressure was mounting. She had spent days focusing on the growing threat posed by humanity's pursuit of power, but now, as she sifted through the intelligence reports, a nagging feeling of unease lingered at the edge of her mind. The tension between her and Ryan Morden had been palpable since their joint victory at Solaris 6. Despite their temporary alliance, she could not shake the feeling that Ryan's humanity, his drive, his belief in strength, was too dangerous to ignore. She had always believed that peace could only be achieved through wisdom and restraint, but every interaction with him seemed to challenge that belief. She closed her eyes, trying to center herself, but the flickering light from the control panel caught her attention. The door to her quarters opened without a sound, and she looked up to see Ryan standing in the doorway, his expression serious, his body tense. "Captain," Ryan said, stepping into the room, "we need to talk." Zeyla'ka's heart skipped a beat. She had expected this confrontation, but it was different now. There was something in Ryan's eyes that told her this conversation was going to change everything. "About what?" she asked, keeping her voice even, though she felt the weight of his gaze on her. Ryan hesitated for a moment, his eyes darting to the floor before he met her gaze again. There was a palpable shift in the air as he spoke, his voice softer than usual. "I'm not just here as a Terran negotiator," he began, his words deliberate. "There's something you need to know about me, about why I'm really here." Zeyla'ka's instincts immediately went on high alert. She had suspected that there was more to Ryan than met the eye, but the weight of his words hit her like a blow to the chest. She rose from her seat, her posture stiff, as she prepared herself for whatever truth he was about to reveal. "I've never been a fan of the human militarization, Zeyla'ka," Ryan continued. "I don't believe that strength through force is the answer. The reason I joined the Terran fleet was to prevent my people from following the path of endless war. There's a faction within humanity, a group of us, that is trying to change things. We're working to stop the rise of militarization and promote peace, but it's not easy." Zeyla'ka froze, her mind struggling to process the words he had just spoken. The confession was like a ripple in a pond, sending shockwaves through her understanding of humanity. She had always seen humans as aggressive, driven by a need to dominate and conquer. Her entire existence had been built on the belief that their kind would always be a threat. But Ryan was different. His confession didn't fit into the box she had created for humans. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The shock in her chest was slowly giving way to confusion. Was this really possible? Could there be factions within humanity that genuinely sought peace? Ryan sighed, stepping closer. "Because, frankly, I didn't think you'd believe me. And more importantly, I didn't want you to see me as a liability. The truth is, there are many of us in humanity who fear the path we're on. But the powers in control, those who want war, who believe in strength over everything, are the ones who have the upper hand. If the Terran coalition knew about this, it would ruin everything." Zeyla'ka felt her world shift beneath her. She had come to expect deceit, manipulation, and violence from humanity. But here, standing in front of her, was a man who not only rejected the very foundation of human aggression, but who also saw the potential for a peaceful future. This wasn't the Ryan she had encountered in the negotiations. This was a different side of him, a side that reflected the possibility she had longed to see in humanity, but had never believed was possible. The room was silent for a long moment as Zeyla'ka processed what Ryan had just confessed. The doubts she had felt growing in her heart now took root, and with them, an unsettling realization. If Ryan was telling the truth, humanity was not the singular unified force she had feared. There were those like him who believed in something better, something more aligned with her own ideals. Slowly, she sat back down, her eyes never leaving Ryan's. "You're telling me there's hope for your people?" she asked, her voice tinged with skepticism. Ryan nodded, his expression earnest. "I believe there is, but it's a small hope, Captain. It's fragile, and it's not the dominant force yet. But that's why we need the support of the League of Planets. We can't afford to let the aggressive factions control our destiny." Zeyla'ka's thoughts were a whirlwind. She had fought so hard for the idea that peace could only come from balance, from patience, from wisdom. But Ryan's words planted a seed in her heart that perhaps peace could also come from change, from those who were willing to fight not with force, but with ideals. She stood up again, her mind racing. "If what you say is true, then we're not enemies. We might be allies, despite everything that divides us." Ryan's face softened, his eyes filled with gratitude. "We could be, Captain. We are allies in a way. We both want the same thing, a peaceful galaxy. But the road to get there is long, and there are still many who believe in war." Zeyla'ka nodded slowly, the weight of his words settling in. She had spent her life fighting for peace in a galaxy that seemed bent on war. Could she really join forces with someone who represented the very species she had been trained to distrust? In that moment, Zeyla'ka understood something profound. Humanity wasn't just the enemy she had always thought. They were a species on the brink of something greater, and Ryan was the bridge to that future. They could work together, despite their differences, despite their histories. The path would be fraught with challenges, but perhaps it was a path worth walking. She met Ryan's gaze, her voice steady. "Then let's work together. We have much to do." Ryan smiled, his confidence returning. "I'm glad to hear you say that. Together, we can make a real difference." Chapter 7. The Rift Grows. The atmosphere in the Arsai Thal was colder than usual, the hum of the ship's systems almost drowned out by the mounting tension in the room. Zeyla'ka stood at the center of the command deck, her posture rigid as the latest communique from the Vrynthi Council flashed across the central display. The order was clear, and it felt like a blow to the very core of everything she had fought for. Preemptive strike. The words loomed on the screen, larger than life. An undeniable command from her people's highest governing body. The target was humanity, the very species she had reluctantly come to respect, the very species she had begun to see through different eyes. The Council's reasoning was simple. Humanity's growing power was seen as an imminent threat to the delicate balance of the galaxy. To the Vrynthi, war was the only way to ensure their survival, and the survival of their vision of a peaceful universe. But to Zeyla'ka, it was more than that. It was the destruction of everything she believed in. The Vrynthi had always prided themselves on their restraint, their diplomacy, and their ability to manage the galaxy's complex web of relationships. A preemptive strike contradicted everything she had been taught about the balance of peace. It was a move she could not, would not support. She turned sharply, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. The Arsai Thal was her ship, her command, and it felt as though it was slipping from her grasp with each passing moment. She had never imagined that she would be the one to oppose the very institution she had been trained to serve. But now, standing in front of the Council's order, she could feel her beliefs breaking apart. "Captain Zeyla'ka," one of her officers called, bringing her back to the present, "the fleet is waiting for your decision." Zeyla'ka's mind raced as she absorbed the weight of her next move. She knew what the Council expected of her, what they had always expected of her, blind obedience to their will. But the reality was different now. There was no way she could carry out this order without betraying her own moral code, without risking everything she had built with humanity. She gathered her thoughts and called a meeting with her senior officers, her voice sharp but controlled. The ship's briefing room was quiet as she entered, the faces of her most trusted allies watching her expectantly. "We have just received orders from the Vrynthi Council," Zeyla'ka began, her tone steady but her heart racing. a preemptive strike against humanity. They believe their power is growing too quickly, that humanity poses a threat to the balance of the galaxy. The Council believes war is the only answer. A tense silence followed. The officers exchanged glances, and Zeyla'ka could feel their discomfort. They knew what was at stake, both in terms of the mission and their personal loyalty to their captain. One of the officers, Alasra, a seasoned veteran with whom Zeyla'ka had worked for years, spoke first. "You're opposed to it, Captain. We know." Zeyla'ka nodded slowly, her eyes hardening. "I cannot follow this order. A preemptive strike would ignite war, and that's not the way we've ever worked. The Vrynthi have always been patient, diplomatic. If we attack humanity, we risk everything we've built. And for what? To stave off a threat that may never come." "Captain, the Council's decision is final," Alasra said, his voice quieter now, more careful. "You know the consequences of defying them." "I know," Zeyla'ka replied firmly, "but I cannot in good conscience follow this order. I will not bring war to the galaxy. We must find another way. I will act independently if I must." Later that night, Zeyla'ka stood in the quiet of her private quarters, staring out into the infinite expanse of space. The stars were far away, distant, yet somehow closer than ever before. She had always seen herself as an extension of the Vrynthi will, an agent of their peace. But now, with the weight of her decision pressing heavily on her chest, she realized that she was alone. The Council would see her as a traitor. Her career, her standing within the Vrynthi would be destroyed. But it no longer mattered. For the first time in her life, Zeyla'ka was seeing things clearly. She couldn't be part of a machine that used war as a tool to secure peace. The galaxy needed something else, something more. Ryan's words from their last conversation echoed in her mind. "We can do this together, Captain. We don't have to resort to war." Zeyla'ka knew what she had to do. The preemptive strike could not happen. She would find a way to stop it, even if it meant defying the very foundation of her people's beliefs. The next morning, Zeyla'ka made her decision. She gathered her closest officers and, in a quiet voice, told them of her plan. She would not launch the attack. She would instead take the Arsai Thal out of the Vrynthi fleet and seek an audience with humanity. She would join forces with Ryan Morden's faction, those who sought peace, those who believed in a future beyond war. The room was filled with silence as her officers absorbed the weight of her words. Finally, Alasra spoke, his voice filled with resolve. "We're with you, Captain, whatever comes next." Zeyla'ka felt a wave of gratitude, but also an overwhelming sense of uncertainty. The path she had chosen was dangerous, but it was the only path she could follow. Her loyalty had always been to peace, and now she would do whatever it took to protect that peace, even if it meant going against her own people. As the Arsai Thal powered up its engines and began its course toward the Terran fleet, Zeyla'ka couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. She was no longer the captain of a ship in the service of the Vrynthi. She was something else now, an ally to humanity, fighting for a future she believed was worth preserving. The storm of conflict raged around her, but she was ready to stand firm, even if it meant defying the Vrynthi Council, even if it meant standing alone. The future of the galaxy was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Zeyla'ka would fight for peace, no matter the cost. Chapter 8. Forbidden Feelings. The quiet hum of the Arsai Thal seemed to fade as Zeyla'ka sat in the dim light of the command room, her thoughts focused on the man who had become both an ally and something much more. Ryan Morden's presence was ever more frequent in her thoughts, his passionate drive for peace igniting something within her that she had long kept buried. The stars beyond the observation windows twinkled like silent witnesses to the growing bond between them. In the solitude of space, with the vastness of the universe surrounding them, Zeyla'ka found herself torn. She had always been a woman of duty. Her mission had always been clear, her path defined by the traditions of the Vrynthi people. But now those very traditions felt like chains, holding her back from something she wasn't sure she understood yet. Ryan's words echoed in her mind, his voice filled with both hope and desperation. "We can do this together, Captain. We don't have to follow the path of war." He had spoken with such certainty, and she had seen the truth in his eyes, an honesty that defied everything she had believed about humanity. They had worked side by side on the mission to secure peace, and with each passing day, Zeyla'ka found herself drawn to him in a way she couldn't explain. Their discussions were no longer just about diplomacy or strategy. They had shared moments of vulnerability, of laughter, and of silent understanding that transcended the language of politics. But as the moments passed, Zeyla'ka realized something much deeper was taking root within her, a feeling that both terrified and exhilarated her. Ryan stood at the communications console, his back to her, his broad shoulders tense as he scanned through the latest intelligence reports. The sharp angles of his face were illuminated by the soft glow of the holographic display, and Zeyla'ka found herself drawn to him. His focus, his intensity, his unwavering belief in the possibility of peace. He had become more than a mere ally in her eyes. He had become a part of her world, in ways she hadn't anticipated. "Captain," Ryan said, turning to face her. His voice was softer than usual, a quiet contrast to the usually formal tone he took when discussing the mission. "We're making progress. The human factions are beginning to listen. Maybe, just maybe, we can turn this around." Zeyla'ka nodded, her gaze lingering on him longer than she intended. "I know, but there are still those who resist. The Council won't accept this change easily. I have to be careful." Ryan took a step closer, his expression shifting. "I know the risks, but you've proven that you can think for yourself. We've come this far because of you, and I—" He stopped himself, suddenly hesitant, as though the words had caught in his throat. Zeyla'ka's heart fluttered, and before she could stop herself, she reached out, her fingers grazing his arm. Ryan's eyes met hers, and for a moment neither of them spoke. It wasn't just the mission they shared anymore, it was something deeper, something that felt both inevitable and forbidden. Zeyla'ka could see the longing in his eyes, the same longing she had tried so hard to suppress. She stepped back, pulling her hand away, her heart racing. This wasn't part of the plan. They were supposed to be diplomats, allies, nothing more. Yet here they were, standing in the quiet of space, caught between their duty and something they could neither explain nor control. "I can't do this," she whispered, her voice trembling despite her resolve. "We can't," Ryan interrupted her, his voice firm yet tender. "We have to try. We have to fight for what we believe in, Zeyla'ka, no matter what it costs." Zeyla'ka closed her eyes, fighting the emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. She had never felt this way before, so torn, so vulnerable. She was a Vrynthi captain, sworn to protect her people and uphold the ideals of her species. But standing here, facing Ryan, she couldn't ignore the truth any longer. She had feelings for him, feelings that went far beyond respect or alliance. She was in love with him. The realization hit her like a storm, a wave of emotion that knocked the breath from her chest. She had known this for some time, but she had been too afraid to admit it, even to herself. Love was a luxury she couldn't afford, especially not when the stakes were so high. "I didn't want this," Zeyla'ka said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't want to feel this way, but I can't stop it. I don't want to." Ryan stepped forward, taking her hand gently in his. His touch was warm, grounding her in a way she hadn't expected. "Neither do I," he said, his voice filled with a quiet resolve. "But we're in this together. Whatever happens next, we face it as one." Zeyla'ka's mind spun. She had never been so unsure of anything in her life. She had always been certain, always clear in her purpose. But now she was caught in a storm of conflicting emotions. Her duty to her people, the responsibility of her mission, and the love she felt for the man standing before her. The path ahead was uncertain. The war she feared was still looming, and the political landscape was shifting beneath their feet. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Zeyla'ka allowed herself to believe in something other than duty. She believed in the possibility of a future with Ryan. She believed in peace, even if it meant defying her people. The next steps were clear, even if the consequences were not. Zeyla'ka and Ryan would work together, side by side, to secure peace for the galaxy. The road would be difficult, the challenges would be immense, but they had come this far, together. Zeyla'ka took a deep breath, her eyes meeting Ryan's with newfound determination. "We'll make this work. We'll find a way to stop the war." Ryan nodded, his eyes filled with conviction. "We will. Together." Chapter 9. The Factions Strike. The quiet hum of the Thal was drowned out by the deafening tension that gripped Zeyla'ka's chest. The news had come in mere hours ago. A faction of humans, those she had once believed to be working for peace, had attempted to steal the Seraphis Crystal, the very artifact she had sworn to protect, the very artifact she had kept hidden from humanity's grasp. The shock of the attempt still lingered in the air, thickening every breath she took. Zeyla'ka had always known that the crystal's power was too dangerous for any one species to control, but she had never anticipated a betrayal so deep, so calculated, from the very humans she had come to trust. As the fleet prepared for the worst, Zeyla'ka stood in the command room, her gaze fixed on the holographic display. Ryan stood beside her, his usually calm demeanor now fraught with frustration and concern. He had known about the faction within humanity that sought power, but he had never imagined it would go this far. "I should have seen this coming," Ryan muttered, running a hand through his hair, his voice heavy with regret. "I thought they were just a minority, radicals, but this is betrayal." Zeyla'ka's fists clenched. "Betrayal, yes, but also a desperate act. They believe the crystal is the key to their survival, Ryan. They believe it will bring them peace, but they don't understand what it truly is. They don't understand the chaos they're unleashing." Ryan's eyes met hers, the weight of their shared responsibility evident in the silent exchange between them. "I know, Captain, but that doesn't change the fact that we need to stop them. If they get their hands on the crystal, it's over. We won't just be looking at war. We'll be looking at destruction on a scale we can't even imagine." The Seraphis Crystal was hidden deep within the core of the Thal, protected by a series of encrypted layers and fail-safes. But the faction, led by a rogue human officer within the Terran fleet, had somehow managed to bypass the first level of security, and now they were inside the ship, hunting for the crystal with the precision of trained soldiers. Zeyla'ka and Ryan were forced to act quickly. The political fallout would be disastrous if the Vrynthi Council learned of the breach, but Zeyla'ka knew that if the crystal was stolen, the consequences would be far worse than any political unrest. It wasn't just the Vrynthi that would suffer, it was the entire galaxy. They raced through the winding corridors of the Thal, their footsteps echoing in the otherwise silent halls. The tension between them was palpable, an unspoken understanding of the stakes weighing heavily on their shoulders. "Do you trust me?" Zeyla'ka asked suddenly, her voice low and focused. Ryan glanced at her, his expression unreadable for a moment before he nodded. "I trust you more than anyone else in this galaxy." Zeyla'ka allowed herself a brief moment of relief. There had been times, many times, when she had questioned everything about humanity. But in that moment, with everything on the line, she realized that Ryan had become more than just a diplomat, more than just an ally. He was the person she trusted most. They reached the crystal's vault, just as the rogue faction made their final push to breach the defenses. The doors were opening, but Zeyla'ka's quick thinking had locked them out once more. She sent a signal to the Thal's command center, triggering the fail-safe protocols. Ryan, his jaw set with determination, stepped up beside her. "We can't stop them without facing them head-on. If they get any closer, the crystal's in their hands." Zeyla'ka nodded grimly, her eyes narrowed. "Then we'll stop them. Together." As the rogue faction's soldiers attempted to break through, Zeyla'ka and Ryan made their move. A tense standoff ensued, weapons drawn, as the rogue officers realized they had been trapped. But Zeyla'ka was ready. Her advanced training, honed over years of diplomacy and combat, was now put to the test. Ryan fought beside her with the same intensity, his every move precise and calculated, despite the chaos that surrounded them. The rogue faction faltered under the pressure, but the battle was not over. Ryan and Zeyla'ka worked as a unit, covering each other's blind spots, each move synchronized with the other. There was no room for hesitation. If they failed, the crystal would be lost, and with it the galaxy's fragile peace. Finally, the last of the rogue soldiers was subdued, their weapons deactivated, their plans thwarted. Zeyla'ka stepped forward, her eyes cold as she accessed the final encryption to lock the crystal away once more. "It's secure," Zeyla'ka said, her voice steady but tinged with exhaustion. For now, Ryan let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. His shoulders sagged, his eyes meeting hers with a mixture of relief and something deeper, something that neither of them had fully acknowledged before. But even in victory, the weight of the consequences hung heavily in the air. The Vrynthi Council would demand answers, and the political fallout would be significant. The fragile alliance between Zeyla'ka's people and humanity was now in jeopardy. The trust between them had been strained to the breaking point. As Zeyla'ka turned to face Ryan, she knew their relationship had just become even more dangerous. The crystal had been secured, but the cost of protecting it had never been clearer. "We did what we had to do," Ryan said softly, his voice low with the weight of everything they had just been through. Zeyla'ka met his gaze, her heart pounding. Yes, but at what cost? Chapter 10. Battle for Balance. Zeyla'ka stood at the heart of the Arsaithal, the Seraphis Crystal before her, its bioluminescent glow casting an eerie light over the room. The once calm and elegant hum of the ship now seemed distant as she prepared for what could be the final act in the war that threatened to tear the galaxy apart. The decision was final. The moment had arrived. She had never intended to wield the crystal's power, not like this. It was too dangerous, too unpredictable. But the Vrynthi Council's preemptive strike order, humanity's aggression, and the fragile alliance they had built had all brought them to this precipice. She could feel the weight of the galaxy's future pressing down on her shoulders, and there was no other choice. She had to act. Ryan stood beside her, his gaze flickering from the crystal to her. There was no more talk of diplomacy, no more plans for a peaceful resolution. Only the knowledge that they had reached the point where words no longer mattered. "Are you sure about this?" Ryan asked, his voice laced with concern, but also acceptance. He had always known she would do what was necessary, but the risk was still immense. Zeyla'ka took a steadying breath, her hand hovering over the crystal. "There is no turning back now, Ryan. The war will destroy everything. The only way to stop it is to show both sides the consequences of their actions." The crystal pulsed, its energy vibrating through the room, and she knew that the decision to use its power was irreversible. Once the crystal was activated, its effects would be far-reaching and unpredictable. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a force of nature, capable of bending time, space, and reality itself. If she used it, she risked everything. But the alternative, war, destruction, endless suffering, was even worse. As Zeyla'ka activated the crystal, a surge of energy blasted through the Arsaithal. It wasn't just the ship that trembled, it was the very fabric of space itself. The light of the crystal grew blinding, and Zeyla'ka felt a sharp, almost physical pull on her consciousness. The world around her seemed to warp, the stars outside the windows stretching into strange, distorted patterns. In that moment she could see the battlefield, the human and Vrynthi fleets locked in combat, their weapons firing at each other, but the power of the crystal coursing through her veins made everything seem slower, quieter. She could feel the ebb and flow of the conflict, the weight of the choices made by both sides, the lives lost, the pain, the anger. The Seraphis Crystal was more than just a tool. It was a mirror reflecting everything that had brought them here. And in that reflection, Zeyla'ka saw something she hadn't expected. A future where peace was still possible, but only if both sides acknowledged the cost of their actions. She focused, gathering the energy of the crystal and directing it outward. The ships, the soldiers, the weapons, everything slowed, then halted, frozen in time. The energy of the crystal spread out, touching every corner of the battlefield, every heart and mind. For a brief moment, everything was still. When the light of the crystal faded, the battlefield was quiet. The war was over. The human and Vrynthi fleets were suspended in space, their weapons deactivated, their soldiers in stasis. Time had been bent, not stopped, but redirected. The crystal had neutralized the conflict by making both sides confront the devastation they were about to bring upon each other. But the consequences were immediate and undeniable. Zeyla'ka felt a deep ache in her chest, the weight of the decision settling over her like a dark cloud. She had succeeded in stopping the war, but what would come next? The Vrynthi Council would never accept the use of the crystal, not in this way. Her actions had broken their most sacred laws, and she knew the price would be steep. Ryan stood beside her, his expression unreadable. He could see the toll the crystal had taken on her, the burden of responsibility in her eyes. He reached out, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "We did it," Ryan said softly. "You did it." Zeyla'ka looked at him, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. "I had to. There was no other choice." "I know," Ryan replied, "but we both know the consequences won't be easy." Zeyla'ka nodded, her gaze turning to the frozen fleets. "I've just made an enemy of my own people. I may have saved humanity, but I've sacrificed my place among the Vrynthi." As the Arsaithal floated in the aftermath, Zeyla'ka knew there would be no going back. The crystal had shown her the way forward, but the cost of that path would haunt her. She had used its power to stop the war, to stop the bloodshed, but at what cost? The Vrynthi Council would demand her punishment. She had defied their order, used the crystal in a way no Vrynthi had ever dared. But the galaxy perhaps had been saved. Humanity had been given a chance at peace, even if it was not the one she had envisioned. Her relationship with Ryan was now more complicated than ever. She had saved humanity, but the political fallout would ripple through the galaxy for years to come. Her people would never forgive her, but Ryan, despite the dangers, would be there by her side. For now, the future was uncertain. The Vrynthi would be furious, and the political consequences of her actions would unfold in the coming days. But Zeyla'ka had done what she believed was right. She had used the crystal to protect the galaxy, even if it meant losing everything she had once held dear. Chapter 11. A Fragile Peace. The Arsaithal hung in the quiet expanse of space, a silent witness to the aftermath of the most crucial decision Zeyla'ka had ever made. The hum of the ship's organic systems was barely noticeable as she stood in the observation deck, her gaze fixed on the stars. The vastness of the galaxy stretched out before her, beautiful, chaotic, and fragile. She had succeeded in stopping the war. She had used the Seraphis Crystal to neutralize the conflict between humanity and the Vrynthi, but the cost had been immense. Her people had branded her a traitor, a rebel who had defied the most sacred laws of the Vrynthi. Her career, her future, had been shattered in an instant. She had given everything for the hope of peace, and yet it felt as though nothing had changed. The Vrynthi Council had condemned her for using the crystal. They had disavowed her, and the repercussions of her actions rippled across her people. She had been cast aside, labeled a criminal in the eyes of those she had once called allies. The Vrynthi had always stood for balance, diplomacy, and restraint. But now, with her actions, she had shattered their most deeply held principles. But Zeyla'ka didn't regret it, not for a moment. Humanity was still divided. Even after the battle, even after the crystal's power had frozen both the Vrynthi and Terran fleets, the underlying tensions remained. There were factions within humanity, just as there were within the Vrynthi, those who believed in peace, and those who saw war as inevitable. The wounds of the past were deep, and peace was fragile. Ryan had been with her through it all. They had fought side by side, risking everything for a future they both believed in. But despite their bond, despite the moments they had shared, Zeyla'ka knew that the road ahead would never be easy. Their love was a forbidden one, born out of necessity, out of shared ideals, but it could never be publicly acknowledged. The political landscape, the divisions between their people, would never allow for it. She walked slowly through the corridors of the Arsaithal, her footsteps quiet on the smooth, organic floor. The ship, like her, was a thing of beauty and tragedy, once a symbol of hope, now a vessel for uncertainty. When she reached the command center, she found Ryan standing before the communications console, his posture rigid, his expression distant. He looked up as she entered, his eyes softening with relief but quickly shifting to something darker, something more complicated. "We've received another message from the Vrynthi Council," he said, his voice low. "They're demanding your surrender." Zeyla'ka felt a cold wave of resignation wash over her. She had known this would come. She had known that her actions would have consequences, but the weight of it still struck her with brutal force. "What will they do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. Ryan hesitated before answering, his expression hardening. They're not asking anymore. They want you imprisoned or worse. They'll stop at nothing to make an example of you. Zeyla'ka closed her eyes for a moment, her mind racing. She had been willing to sacrifice everything for peace, but now she faced the reality of that sacrifice. The future she had envisioned, a future where humans and Vrynthi could coexist in peace, was slipping away from her grasp. But something inside her refused to surrender completely. She had chosen this path because she believed in the potential of humanity. She believed that peace could be achieved if they were willing to work for it, to fight for it, no matter the cost. Ryan stepped closer, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "What are we going to do, Zeyla'ka?" She met his gaze, her eyes filled with both sorrow and determination. "We will not give up, not yet. The Vrynthi may reject me, but humanity has hope. There are factions within your people that still believe in peace, just as there are within mine. We cannot let that die." Ryan nodded, his face filled with understanding. "You're right. There's still hope, but it won't be easy. The road ahead is going to be harder than we ever thought." Zeyla'ka's heart ached as she thought of the future they had worked so hard to build. A future where love, diplomacy, and understanding could overcome the chaos and violence that had plagued their histories. But the price for that future had already been paid. Her place among the Vrynthi was gone, but in her heart, she knew that her path was clear. She had to continue, no matter the cost. "We will continue," Zeyla'ka said, her voice filled with quiet resolve. "Together, we will find a way to make peace, even if it costs us everything." As Zeyla'ka gazed out into the stars, she realized that peace was a fragile thing. It wasn't something that could be achieved with one decision, one victory, or one loss. It was a journey, one that would require sacrifice, courage, and hope. And despite everything, despite the risks and the challenges, she believed in that hope. She had chosen to believe in humanity's potential for peace, and she would continue to fight for that belief, even if it meant standing alone, even if it meant sacrificing everything. Ryan stood beside her, and for a moment they shared a quiet understanding. The road ahead would be long, and the challenges would be great. But Zeyla'ka was no longer the captain of a ship in service to the Vrynthi. She was a woman who had chosen to follow her heart, to believe in the future, and to fight for a peace that could never be truly won without sacrifice. She and Ryan may never be able to openly be together, but in this moment it didn't matter. Their shared belief in the potential for peace was enough. They had taken the first step, and that was all they could do. Chapter 12. New Beginnings. The Arsai Thal drifted silently through the stars, her engines humming softly as she made her way toward the heart of Vrynthi space. The ship that had once been her pride, her home, was now filled with the weight of uncertainty. Zeyla'ka stood at the helm, her gaze fixed on the distant stars outside the observation windows. The universe stretched before her, vast and filled with possibility, but also fraught with challenges. She had returned to the Vrynthi, but the welcoming she had once expected was no longer there. She had been branded a traitor, an exile, and yet she had not come back to seek forgiveness or approval. No, Zeyla'ka had come back to face her people, to stand before them with the truth in her heart, her belief that peace, despite everything, was still possible. The decision to use the Seraphis Crystal had cost her everything. The Vrynthi Council had made it clear. There was no place for someone who had defied their sacred laws, no room for someone who had risked everything for an ideal. But Zeyla'ka didn't regret her choice. She had done what she believed was right, even if it had meant walking away from the life she once knew. The door to the command room slid open, and Ryan stepped inside, his familiar presence grounding her. He had been with her through the darkest moments, and now, as they faced the unknown together, his quiet support gave her the strength she needed. He stood beside her, his eyes thoughtful as he took in the same stars that had once represented everything she had fought for. "You're sure about this?" Ryan asked softly, his voice full of concern. Zeyla'ka nodded, her eyes unwavering as she looked at the future stretching before them. "I have to be.
The Vrynthi may never accept me again, but I cannot let that stop me. The future of the galaxy, of humanity, is worth fighting for. Ryan placed a hand gently on her shoulder, his touch reassuring. We'll do it together, whatever comes next.
As the Arsaithal entered Vrynthi space, Zeyla'ka could feel the weight of the moment. Her return was not one of triumph or recognition. She was not the captain she had once been. But as the ship neared the Vrynthi capital, she didn't feel fear. She felt a quiet resolve. The Vrynthi Council had summoned her, and she would stand before them, not as a defeated traitor, but as someone who had chosen a different path, one that she believed held the future of the galaxy. She would stand before them and speak the truth that had become her guiding light, that peace was still possible, that humanity, despite its flaws, had the potential to be a force for good if they were guided properly. As the Arsaithal docked, Zeyla'ka stepped onto the planet's surface, her heart steady. She had no illusions about what awaited her. The Vrynthi would not forgive her easily. She would be exiled, ostracized, and yet, in her heart, she knew she had done the right thing. The meeting with the Vrynthi Council was short, brutal, and without mercy. Zeyla'ka stood alone, facing the very leaders who had once been her mentors, her allies. The judgment was swift and harsh. She was stripped of her rank, her title, her place within the Vrynthi society. The punishment was exile. She was cast out, a symbol of everything that had gone wrong in the eyes of her people. But Zeyla'ka didn't flinch. The consequences of her actions were clear, but they didn't matter. The road she had chosen was hers alone to walk, and it was a road that would lead her to a future she could believe in. As Zeyla'ka left the council chambers, Ryan was there waiting for her, his presence a comfort. She met his gaze, and for a moment they stood in silence. No words were needed. He had stood by her, believed in her, when no one else had. They had both sacrificed so much, but now there was a new path ahead. We've both lost so much, Ryan said softly, his voice filled with a quiet understanding. But maybe that's what it takes to build something better. Zeyla'ka nodded, her heart heavy but hopeful. Yes, the future is uncertain, but I believe it's still worth fighting for. As they stood there, watching the stars together, Zeyla'ka felt a shift inside her. She had made her choice, and though the consequences were steep, she knew that her path was just beginning. The galaxy was still a place of conflict and division, but she had found something in herself and in Ryan that gave her hope. She turned to him, her eyes filled with determination. We will build something new. Together. Ryan smiled, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. Together.